Hi, I'm Samir. I'm going to spend most of my time in front of that computer, but I figure I'll spend a little bit of time standing up here in front first. Because, frankly, that's more entertaining when you see a crazy person jump around. Right, so I want to talk a little bit about what I call WebOps. It turns out I did not invent this term, I just thought I had. If you Google it, it turns out someone else came up with this like 5 years ago, so I feel proud to be part of a movement. WebOps is the art of making sure that your website doesn't just run on your local machine. Who here is an enterprise software developer, as in you work in a big company like a bank or something? Like what, half? Okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Most people, it's like statistically, most people work for big companies, right? If most people work for small companies, something will be weird, right? You kind of have to. So that's fine. Who here works on a web application? Like lots of you? I can't count, so let's say lots. And who here knows how your application runs on a server? Ooh, tough crowd. Right, you lot can leave. But the rest of you, no, hopefully there'll be something useful here. So, and one more question. Who here uses Windows? On production? Oh, God. Right, we'll fix you lot later. I've got a separate talk for that. It's going to be held in the bar at midnight. I'll bring the tequila. But, you know, for the rest, like, we'll figure something out. It'll be fine. So I wanted to show you a couple of things. Oh, yeah, by the way, this is my website. This is unrelated, but I figure I'd just get some advertising in. If you write JavaScript and are tired of it, come talk to me. We like to make computers write JavaScript because they're way better at it and less likely to. In fact, they're good at catching bugs. The premise of this talk, or typing, or I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing, we'll figure it out, is that echoing? Can you hear me okay? Cool. It's just echoing in my ears. That's wonderful. That's going to drive me nuts for the next 40 minutes. The premise is to not just make a program, because making programs is fun, but deliver your program to the world, because that's even better, right? I don't know about you lot, but when I got into software engineering, or I wouldn't say software, when I got into programming, it was not to make Hello World applications for myself. It was to show my mum a Hello World application so she could be proud of me. She is still not proud of me, but we're getting there. Frankly, if she had to see some of the enterprise code, I mean, I've seen the enterprise code I've written, I'm not proud of me either, but hands up. So let's deploy an application. I want to show you a little app that I wrote. Sure, this one will work. Close that. Cool, there it is. Who here can see this? So I wrote a thing because I was bored. This is Conways Game of Life, right? This is nice. I think it's pretty. No one else does, but I think it's pretty. So I was having fun with this, and I was like, okay, let's put it online. So I made a web version, and that was fun. And then I realized that only I could see the web version, because it turns out if you put a thing on localhost :8080, only you can see that thing. Let's do something more interesting. You have to have Conways Game of Life at every software craftsmanship conference, so I thought I'd throw it in. So let's do something useful. So I made it. Wasn't me either. I hope someone brought tequila. So let's put a thing on a server, right? So first thing, when you're deploying an application, please get comfortable with the terminal, right? If you like dragging and dropping things, I like dragging and dropping things too. It's great. You get to click a button and drag over there, and it's visual, and you can see what happens. This is great. We made like graphical user interfaces, like I think Nat Price talked about earlier, like 30 years ago or earlier, 40 years ago, for a reason. They are better than command line interfaces, but they are not automatable, right? Automating, dragging, and dropping, I don't know, whoever's used Selenium or WebDriver knows how painful that is. Don't do it. So get comfortable with your command line. I'm going to show you a little bit about the command line, but I'm going to assume you kind of know what's happening on the screen. If you don't know what's happening on the screen, wave, and I will explain it. I will assume that this is what you mean, not, there's a fire, or I'm dying, I need help. Like, if you wait, I'll just explain what's on the screen. So I'm going to go to my server, which is over here. I'm calling it green for reasons that will become obvious later. Why is that still up? I thought the ad break is totally over. Let's go somewhere else. I'm going to deploy this application. Can you hear me? Okay, I'm going to deploy this application. I call it Predestination because Conways' game of life is fun in that where you live or die is determined entirely by a random seed that was determined at the start of the program, and you have no choice. So we're going to clone this onto my server. We're going to do everything as root because live dangerously. We're going to build it. It's in Python. So I'm just going to install the dependencies, and then we're going to run it. Who here uses Java or C# or one of those enterprisey languages that we love so much? Cool. I really envy you lot because you must have like so many coffee breaks. Like you hit compile, and then you're like, well, wait, who writes Scala? You must be so good at foosball. Like, I write Python, and then so I change some code and I run it, and like I don't get to drink nearly as much coffee as I would like. And Java applications, man. So I just cloned this onto a server. If you write Java, I'm not very good at this microphone thing. I'm really sorry. So if you write Java, then you probably don't want to clone your Java source code onto the server. That's a bad idea. But you probably are publishing a jar or a war or one of those weird acronyms. I can't remember what they mean. So push it up to Artifactory or Nexus or whatever you use to host your application bundles. And then you can just clone that. You just pull that down instead, right? So it's the same thing. My server's already got Python on it, so that's nice and easy. And then I'm just going to run it. Wait, I'll run it on a port, because that's how you run an app. Boop. It's running. Where's my mouse? This is the problem with not mirroring your screen, is you have no idea where your mouse is at any given moment. So I'm going to run it on this machine. Ooh, boy. That's not the right one. That one. Hooray. So it's Conway's game of life, right? In a web browser. It is running on a real server on port 8080, which is not that nice, but we'll give it a second. That was really simple, right? I've deployed my application to a server, and as long as this computer never crashes and my terminal doesn't die, and I don't close the lid and it goes on standby, I have a running web application, which doesn't sound that ideal, frankly, thinking about it. So I want to run through a few techniques just to make this more manageable, less likely for this machine to be controlling what happens on that server somewhere in the cloud, wherever the cloud is. Does anyone know? Actually, I think this one is in Ireland. I can't remember. I told Amazon, hey, can you give me a machine? And they gave me a machine. It's wonderful, isn't it? And they send me a bill at the end of the month for too much money, and I get upset. Who here deploys to cloud stuff? What about people who don't deploy to cloud? You have in-house servers. Right. Okay, so a lot of this stuff translates. When it doesn't translate, I'm going to try and explain it. It's good to know. Oh, who was there a third option? Yes. What's the third option?
Physical machines and rack space.
Oh, that's the cloud. Wait. So you're in a colo, or
sorry?
You're in you have your own servers, but they're in a data center somewhere. That's the same as being in-house. You just have to drive there, right? I mean, no one actually, you can keep servers in your office, but that's a terrible idea, right? Because I bet your office internet connection isn't quite as good as it should be, right? So I'm going to assume you're not doing that. If you are doing that, go pay someone else to host your servers because they're better at it than you, unless you actually are rack space. Sorry, I have a really sore throat, so that tea's going to go really fast, and then I'm going to run out and get another one, and you lot can amuse yourselves for 5 minutes. So I'm running a server. So it kind of sucks that if I press Control-C, it stops, right? That's kind of shitty. Am I allowed to swear? Okay. Well, so that kind of sucks. I don't know how well you can see this terminal on the right, those of you at the back. So what I might do actually is just kind of drag it up. So if I run it again, then yeah, it starts again. Let's refresh it, because frankly, that's a really boring game of life situation. There we go. Probably should have put an epilepsy warning at the start of this talk, I'm sorry. So, if I want to run it in the background, I can just stick an ampersand at the end of my command line, right? Hooray, now it's in the background, it should start up again. Yeah. And then I can just do other stuff with my terminal as well. But if I exit my shell, it actually gives me a warning. It will end up killing things anyway. Ooh, interesting. Well, that's not what I expected. Let's just kill it anyway. Ooh. You know the problem with live demos is sometimes things happen that you don't expect. Sorry, I have a solution. Worst case scenario, we're just going to kill the Amazon server and create a new one. I figure that, turn it off on again works with servers too. You just literally delete the server. That works really well for solving most of your problems. Okay, we disconnected and it stopped, right? I tried to, so putting it into the background didn't really help. Right, so if I run it again, hopefully it'll start up again. Let's see what happens. Yeah, it's going. So, I'll stop it again. So instead of, if I want to run it in the background, that's great, but it won't last past the lifetime of my shell. There's a program called NoHup, which solves that problem, kind of. Let's try that. Oh boy. Right, sorry. Got to wrap it in a subshell. And we'll be good to go. And now we can get the output just being piped to that file, which is convenient, right? So we're getting somewhere. Now we can deploy an application and we can run it and we can leave the server alone and it'll get going. So we're good. It's very easy to run my application. One more thing I should do is currently running as root. That's a terrible idea. Don't do that. So what I want to do instead is I'll add a user. Can you read that text on the right? Like, wave if you can't read this terminal. Cool. So I'm going to add a user, and I'll just run it as that user. That user has no access to anything. Oh, good. And I'll just pipe it to, I'll put all the output into like temp/log. Right, now it's going out to a temp file, and we start it up again. We're good to go. So, I have successfully deployed an application to my server. It works. It is running. I proved it. Right, you can go to that website, and it'll kind of work. Right, hopefully. I don't actually know. I haven't checked. But, I'm there, and it's working. Are there any questions? Apart from, why do I care? I don't know the answer to that one. Marvelous. Let's carry on. So there's a couple problems with this. One is if my server restarts for some reason, because Amazon hates me or something, they're good at that, then I have to notice that my application is down. And frankly, with this one, I wouldn't notice. I'd have to log onto the server, which might be difficult if, say, I'm on a train or a plane or drunk. Especially if I can't remember what my SSH passphrase is. And I'd have to restart the application, which means I need to remember that weird sequence of commands. I could put it in a script. That would probably be a good idea, right? But it's going to be slightly different from server to server, so putting it in the Git repo makes a little bit of sense, but maybe not so much. And then I have the other problem, which is it's still running on port 8080 rather, and WebOps, you want to run on port 80. There's an issue with ports that I don't know if you're familiar with. I think on both Windows and all Unix machines, any port below 1024 is reserved. Only root can access those ports, which means I either need to run my application as root, or I need to have something else running as root that's proxying requests to my application. Now, the latter example is probably the safer one, because I can have a very safe program that's running as root that's designed only to push requests to my unsafe program because I'm not a kernel developer. I don't really know how machines work, and running programs as root is generally a bad idea because they can access everything, right? Even if it's completely benign, it's a terrible idea to run stuff as root for one very simple reason. A small amount of your disk is reserved, at least on Unix machines, Linux machines, for root. So if you hit, I think, about 98% capacity on most Linux distros, it will, like, writes will start to fail. Like, you won't be able to write anymore. There's still a couple of percent left over for root processors. They can carry on writing, which is a safety measure so that you can log into the machine as root and fix everything, right? Because if you don't have any disk space left, even logging in might fail. Like, if it tries to, write a temporary file as part of the login, it's going to fail, and then your login fails. If your process is running as root, it can easily take up 100% of the disk just with log files or whatever, completely destroy your machine, make it inaccessible, and then you have to do the fun thing where you go to the Amazon console, delete the machine, create a new one, spend 2 hours setting it up, etc. I had to install Python on this machine, I had to set up a few dependencies. It's no fun. So you don't want to run these things as root. Instead, what you want to do is let someone else who wrote a very powerful web server run their thing as root. I like Nginx. There's another one called Apache. You probably heard of both of them, but if not, those are the two. There are others, but those are the ones to trust because everyone uses them, and when someone finds a bug, it gets fixed very, very quickly. So I'm going to tell Nginx to proxy any requests to my application, any request to port 8080 to port 8080, so it talks to my application instead. So, pretty simple, I think. So, I'm going to create boop, 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 boop. Why do you hate? Oh, sorry. How did the cursor go up? Okay. So I'm going to create a new site. I'll call it predestination.com. Word of advice when you're doing live demos, don't pick names for things that you can't type. It doesn't work very well, right? So I'm just going to, because I am very lazy, I'm going to paste that in and then explain to it what it does rather than typing it out. Also, I kind of feel like your time is worth something. So this is saying, listen to port 8080, this is the default server. Also listen on IPv6 to the same port. And then proxy passes the important line here. Proxy everything to localhost 8080. The next two lines are just for WebSockets. If you don't, I only need those because I need Nginx to handle WebSockets connections and pass them through. So, create that file. So that was under the sites available directory. I also need to link that to sites enabled. And then, I can never remember how this works, -s reload, right? And now, let's see if this works. Hooray. So I'm running on port 80, right? One of the really important things about the operations side of running a website is knowing what's not your responsibility. In this case, writing a web application is my responsibility as a developer. Handling traffic to port 80, like the default web port, it probably shouldn't be my web application's responsibility. It's not designed for things like making sure that all the headers are correct and they're not malformed. It's not designed to, like, your favorite Java library for handling HTTP, whatever it might be, is probably not as well designed as production-ready web servers that are handling requests designed to find bugs in your application, try and get memory leaks going, things like that, like buffer overflows. It's actually less true of Java, but if you're writing, if you're using Ruby, for example, your favorite web framework for Ruby, whatever that might be, if it's Rails, please leave. Then you can trust it to a point to handle web requests, and definitely in development, it's fine. But in production, let someone else do the job, right? It's not your responsibility to write a production-grade web application with a minimal attack surface. It's your job to write business features, probably. I'm assuming you're not writing web servers. If you are writing web servers, then that's your job. It's the same thing with like making sure your application continues to run. So I could write a shell script that runs my application. I could put a little while loop in, so if it crashes, it restarts. And I could make it start at startup and things like that. But I feel like this is getting away from my application's responsibility. So instead, I'm going to let someone else do the job. So there's a wonderful thing in that comes bundled, with, honestly, with most Linux things, most Linux distros, called Supervisor. And its entire job is to make sure your application carries on running. And when it crashes, it will restart it. And when your server starts, it will make sure that all of its processes start. So we'll do the same thing. Right. So I'm just going to create another config file. Notice I haven't done any programming yet. This is very important. If you have to write code to manage your web servers, I wouldn't say something's gone wrong, but there might be an easier way to do things. That includes shell scripts, right? I want to avoid shell scripts as much as possible. So I'm going to create another config file in etc/supervisor/conf.d, and it's going to look like this. So it's going to run that command. It's going to set the environment variables, and it's going to set the user, right? So if I check the status of supervisor, there's nothing there. I can tell it to reread my config and update itself. And now it's running. I don't know if I stopped the previous one. Should probably kill that. And then yeah. So I'll restart itself. Still going. Wonderful. So this means that if I restart the server, if I need to do some upgrades, for example, then it will carry on running. If it crashes, it will carry on running. Or restart itself. In general, I don't want to think of all the possible ways in which a server can kill my application. Your server is a hostile environment, right? There's so many things that can go wrong. Even if it's behind your corporate intranet or whatever it might be, there's just other stuff running on that machine that can cause problems. And remember, it is still a physical machine. Even if you use the cloud, even if you put your stuff on Google Cloud or Amazon or Rackspace or whatever, it's still a physical machine at the end of the day. There is still a non-zero chance that you have an engineer who's walking along your data center and trips over a cable, and it turns out it's the power cable for the server that you happen to be running on, and now your VM is gone, and you need to recreate, or it will be automatically recreated by their stuff, but you need to make sure your stuff starts with it. How much time have I got left? No one knows. Fantastic. I'm glad we're on schedule. No, we're not on schedule. Oh, sorry. 15 minutes. Fantastic. I want to show you one more thing. So this is all well and good. So now I have an application that is running stably on my server. I can turn the server off and on again. It will disappear. The server can reboot itself for unattended upgrades, which is pretty standard again on most Linux distros. Server distros now is at least the security updates. They'll patch themselves. They'll restart themselves. I don't know if they'll restart themselves. That probably is a bad idea, but they'll at least patch themselves as much as possible and recommend that you restart them. So I have a thing. It works. This kind of sucks though, because this took me half an hour in front of you lot, and I spent an hour on this beforehand, setting up this server to have all the relevant things. It would be really, really nice if we didn't have to do that. So I just log off this server. So what is it called? There's a thing called Ansible, which I'm a big fan of. Ansible is a declarative way of specifying what your server should look like, right? There are other things. Puppet's very good. Chef is very good. SaltStack is very good. Don't really care which tools you use. The important thing is I didn't have to write any code, right? When it comes to operations, coding is dangerous. You know what more code means? You know what value code adds? Someone tell me, what value does code add? Nothing. Code is a cost, right? Like lines of code, I mean, if you can do the same thing in fewer lines of code, you're winning, right? So less code has value. More code has less value. So if I can do everything without coding, it's far more likely to be stable. It's far less likely to have different behavior on different machines or different behavior over time. So if I run the same script in a month, and I happen to be using a different version of my scripting language, things can change. If I'm using a declarative style, where I'm going to make that a little bit bigger, I just define configuration, then I can be pretty confident that even if the underlying behavior changes, like what I've defined will stay, right? As long as my tools are half decent, which in this case they are. So I've defined here all the steps that I did before. I've just defined them in a YAML file. So create a user account for the application, create an application directory, clone the repository, install the application dependencies, set up the supervisor. There's some more stuff about Nginx. It also sets up the DNS. If I run that, need a few configuration. That's called a playbook in Ansible terms. So I run it. It will just run through all those steps, and it will just do whatever it needs to do. So clone the. So you'll see when it says OK. So for example, when it says clone the repository OK, it means it didn't do anything. It didn't have to do anything because it was already cloned. Some stuff it did change. So it did set up the supervisor because it had to restart it to make sure it was running. Restarted the application, configured Nginx. It didn't have to. Reloading the Nginx configuration and updated the DNS. And we're still running. Everything is good to go. So that did everything I just showed you, except it did it in, 15 seconds instead of 30 minutes. And if I need to set up a new server because I accidentally deleted it in the Amazon console, and I do that sometimes because I'm not really looking what I'm doing most of the time, this time it'll take me 15 seconds, right? This is the second rule, as far as I'm concerned, of operations is, it's just like programming. Don't do things twice, right? If you find yourself typing the same thing 3 times, well, twice is probably fine, but 3 times, make a thing that does it instead, right? And I could have written a shell script that did all the steps I did before. A shell script is imperative, so you do A, then do B, then do C, then do D. And that's nice. Like, I told it to do the things, and it did the things. This script, let me bring the script back up. This Ansible file, I'll wander over this way. I haven't said hi to you lot. Hi, you lot. You seem nice. I hope you're nice. So, I put a comment at the top, basically saying create a user account for the application. That's not really what this is doing. This is ensuring that the user account web exists with the shell bin false. If it already exists, it will do nothing. And if it doesn't exist, it will create it. And this one says create the application directory. Again, it's not really creating it. It's ensuring that that directory exists with these properties. Same with cloning the repository. It ensures that the repository is cloned. So you know. So you get the idea. It's not about doing things. It is about state migrations. We are in this state, and we'd like to be in this state. What are the changes that we need to apply? So if I don't have this directory existing, then I'll create it. If I have the directory, but it's got a different owner, then I'll change the owner. If the directory's all there and all the properties are correct, then we're good to go. If I run that Ansible script a second time, it will change nothing. It'll probably restart the applications, but it won't actually change anything because it doesn't need to. Idempotency is really valuable, not just in software development, but even more in operations, because we don't know what state our servers are in most of the time. They drift, they change. People log onto the machine and change a couple of things. So I don't want to say do these things, because I don't know where I'm starting from. I could write a lot of if checks, but that seems like a terrifying script to write. Instead, I want to say be in this state, and define exactly the state I need it to be in, and then tell it to go. If I run it twice, it will still be in that state. If someone logs onto the machine, I'll have a nightly job that runs this over and over again, so that if they change something, ooh, cool. Getting a weird ringing sound, but is that just me? Okay, I'm going to move this way and see if it changes. Great, that kind of worked. So I can create a nightly job that just runs this over and over again. And if someone does log onto my machine and change it, it'll just change it straight back, right? one more thing I want to show you. This is all well and good. Some of us need to actually keep our websites running, which means if they go down, like I can't just restart it to do some upgrades, or I can't just take the application down in order to pull a new version, right? This is why I call this machine green. I have another machine called blue. Who here has heard of blue-green deployment? Marvelous. Who here has done it? Cool, I'm going to show you how. It's really easy, right? So what this Ansible script does, it runs on all hosts, which means, but I can tell it to run on specific hosts, right? I actually have a little file. I'll delete that token. That's my blue host, and that's my green host. I could have 10 of these, right? I can compartmentalize them into different roles, so I could have my front-end server and my back-end server, and my database server, etc. And then I have blues and greens of each. The important thing about blue and green is they look identical. They might be different sizes, like you can scale them up and down as required, but in terms of roles, they have all the same roles. I only have one server right now, so that's nice and easy, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run all these things, and then update the DNS to the given cluster. So what it's going to do is it's going to go talk to Cloudflare, who's my DNS provider, and say, you're now going to point this host name to this IP instead, after it's done all the other things. And you can actually, I was actually thinking, and I didn't have time to do this, unfortunately, sticking another line in here which just does a very basic smoke test. Hit the application with curl and check if it's up, right? And if that fails, then we know we shouldn't continue, right? We can add it in if we have time. It's not that difficult. So if I quit that, so this time I'm going to deploy but to the blue server, and I'm going to deploy a different version, which I've called blue. That version is just a branch in Git in this case, but if you can use whatever you want for your versions. If you like Docker images, you can just use the version, the Docker image, etc. So this is deploying to my blue server. It's going to take a little while longer because I have never deployed the application to this server before, whereas before we'd already kind of done it manually. Is it me or are those going faster than they were before? I don't know. You'd think, as someone who wrote the application, they'd have a clue, but no idea. All right. Where is my mouse? If someone sees the cursor, could they let me know where it is? There it is. Lovely. Right. So you saw it slow down and speed up. That's just because the network requests were stopping for a while and they retried them. I've deployed my new application, new version of the application. The old one is still running fine. Really important thing about continuous deployment. You always want to support the last version of the application with your API, or the last version of the front end with the back end, right? Because people aren't going to just hit refresh randomly. The application is still running. My new version of the application, it actually shipped a new front end and no changes to the back end. So in my case, it was easy. But if you are changing the back end, then you want to think about supporting things that haven't hit refresh, or maybe there are mobile devices where you actually do need to ship a software update. And mobile will eventually get to the state of the web where you can hit refresh and have a new application, but we're not there yet. So, but if I hit refresh, now it's blue. Trust me, it's blue. I know you can't see it at the back because projectors, but it's not just a black screen. It's actually doing stuff. Could probably change it later. You know, blue-green deployment literally means changing the green to the blue. That's actually what it means. No, that's a lie. That was just coincident. I actually wrote the blue version and then realized I could use it to demo blue-green deployment. That was quite helpful. So all I did was deploy exactly the same just to a different server and then flip the DNS. And you can see that. I just probably have my DNS configuration open somewhere around here. It's way too hard to read. Forget it. You have to trust me when I say it worked. Only one more thing I want to talk about. I got like 3 minutes. This whole time, I have been. Where's that thing? Ooh. Well, Well, I was going to give you a quick demo about how to do monitoring really, really cheaply. I just use a service called Pingdom, which just pings your website once a minute. Oh, it actually did work eventually. So, I've been getting emails this whole time saying applications down, applications up, applications down, applications up, applications down, applications up, etc. That's the cheapest way of doing it. Like it costs almost nothing and you can get a service. This is not the only one, but I like them. More importantly, if you're operating in-house and you can't use a third-party service to ping your website once a minute, turns out that's really easy to do. Just make a Jenkins job that does the same thing. Hits your website once a minute, checks it's still up. You'll get a Jenkins job failing if it's not up, and then, I don't know, whatever alerting you've already got built into your CI system, that works pretty well. It doesn't just have to be ping either. Like, especially if you've done it in your CI system, you could just run your tests against your real app. Stay away from the ones that write, but the ones that read, you know, just hit the front end, poke a few buttons, make sure they still do the same thing as usual. It works really well. And then that's the cheapest monitoring you can have, right? All the graphs and stuff, like, well, I say monitoring, that's alerting. So graphs and stuff are great, you know, making sure your response times are fine, very important, making sure that, you know, you're actually doing the right thing, that your customers are, all your funnels, making sure things are going through, all the analytics stuff, very important. That's all business specific, right? And you'll need custom solutions, not necessarily like an implementation, but at least like a custom way to plug into whatever analytics provider you're using. But the very basics of alerting, you can do in 2-line shell script in a Jenkins job. It's trivial, and I recommend you do it just for anything, right? You have an application that's up because you want to, I don't know, keep it, you know, for your blog. It's easy. So, with that, I probably have lots more to talk about, but we're practically out of time. I'll just say a couple words. I'm sure some of you have used Docker a lot. 2 things about Docker. It doesn't do that much on its own. It's a great way to bundle application, run an application. You don't need a supervisor. It is a supervisor, right? And you can get it to spit out the logs. You can make sure it's handling errors and things like that. It doesn't do things like deploying a new version of it, or deploying the right version of an image, right? So you can either use a tool like Ansible or Puppet to do that, or if you want to go the full hog down the container route, then set up something like Kubernetes, which is what we do internally at work. I didn't want to talk too much about that because, frankly, all of the solutions are very different, and I wanted to stick to things that are quite generic. But if you do ship Docker images, come grab me later. I can show you how we do it, and I think we've got it pretty much nailed at this point. So if you want just a quick demo of how we ship Docker images to production, just come yank me. With that, are there any questions? Don't be shy. Sandra, what's your question? All right, fair enough. Well, if there's no questions, you can always grab me afterwards. If you want to know why this stuff actually matters, I recommend running a website for a week, and you'll figure it out very quickly. And with that, thank you very much.